I pretended to be a poor, helpless mother when I met my daughter-in-law's wealthy family. I never expected their secret to destroy everything. I never told my son the truth about my life. Not once in 36 years. To him, I was just his mother. A quiet woman who left home early, returned late, cooked whatever simple meal she could put together, saved every penny and kept her head down. A woman with modest shoes, plain clothes, and an old handbag that should have been thrown away years ago. A woman who was nothing special. At least, that's what he believed. He never knew that every morning when I walked out of that modest apartment in Seattle, I wasn't going to a regular office job, as he called it. I was going to a corner office on the 31st floor of a glass tower overlooking Elliott Bay, where I served as a senior financial strategist for one of the largest investment corporations in the Northwest. He never knew about the multi-million-dollar contracts I negotiated, the quarterly meetings where CEOs waited for my numbers, the nights I stayed up analyzing markets that affected thousands of lives. The salary? $42,000 every month before bonuses. The investments that multiplied year after year. The wealth I built silently, privately, intentionally. He never knew because I didn't tell him. Some people hang their success on the wall. Others wear it like a shining badge. I learned early. True dignity lives quietly. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand applause. It just is. So I stayed silent. I lived modestly. I watched him grow. And I let him believe whatever he wanted to believe about me. Until the day everything changed. It started with a phone call on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I had just finished reviewing a proposal from a London firm when my phone buzzed. I smiled when I saw the name. Elias, my son. But the moment I answered, I felt it in my bones. Something was off. "Mom," he said, his voice tight, nervous. I need a favor." A favor? Elias never asked for favors. He was responsible, proud, stubborn, and too much like me in all the wrong ways. "What is it?" I asked. It's about dinner. Claire's parents are coming from Switzerland for the first time. They want to meet you. We're having dinner on Saturday. Can you come?" There was a tremble in his voice, a small one, but unmistakable. He didn't sound excited. He sounded worried. Something in my chest tightened. "Do they know anything about me?" I asked carefully. Silence. Then a breath. Then, "I told them you're simple, that you work, at an office, that you live alone, nothing fancy. You're just you." Just me. As if me was something to be apologized for. I closed my eyes and let his words settle like dust on old shelves. Simple, ordinary, nothing fancy. It wasn't the words themselves. It was the tone, the hesitation, the fear of being judged through me, as if I were a liability he had to manage, as if my existence needed smoothing out so it wouldn't embarrass him in front of his polished, glossy in-laws. I swallowed every emotion rising in my throat and said, "I'll be there." After we hung up, I sat alone in my living room, old, comfortable sofa, a bookshelf I built myself, a small TV set, no designer rugs, no shimmering art pieces, nothing that screamed wealth. I had built my life intentionally quiet, and now my own son saw me as small. Maybe he always had. Something inside me, something ancient, something forged through decades of being underestimated, rose slowly, like a storm building at sea. If Elias and Claire's parents thought I was a simple, broke, naive woman, then maybe that's exactly who I needed to become. Not because I enjoyed pretending, but because I wanted to see who they truly were. I had an instinct, a cold whisper in my gut, the kind I only felt in boardrooms filled with hidden agendas. Claire's family, they cared about money, status, appearances. I could sense it from the beginning. And now I wanted the truth. So on Saturday, I dressed in the worst outfit I owned, an old shapeless navy dress, faded at the sleeves, sandals I kept only for garden work, no makeup, no jewelry, hair pulled back into the clumsiest bun imaginable. I looked in the mirror, and for the first time in years, I didn't recognize the woman staring back. She looked worn, forgotten, like life had pressed her into the ground until she no longer had a shape. Perfect. I grabbed my battered canvas tote bag, the one I used for groceries, and stepped outside. Instead of driving my car, I called an old taxi company. The yellow cab arrived 15 minutes later. "Where to?" the driver asked. I handed him the slip of paper with the restaurant's address. His eyebrows shot up. "Fancy place." "Yes, apparently."
We drove through downtown Seattle as the city glowed under the late evening sun. The sky was streaked with lavender and gold. People walked with purpose, dressed for dinners, dates, concerts. I watched them pass by my window, feeling strangely apart from all of it. As the taxi pulled up in front of La Lumiere, one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city, my breath caught. Tall glass doors, soft golden lighting spilling onto the sidewalk, a valet in a sharp black suit, couples stepping out of elegant cars, Mercedes, Teslas, BMWs, laughing, chatting, wrapped in luxury, the kind of place where the menu doesn't list prices, where the waiters carry themselves like diplomats, where people wear wealth like perfume. I paid the driver, stepped out, and held my tote bag close, suddenly feeling very small under the warm lights. Inside, the restaurant buzzed with quiet conversations, clinking glasses, soft piano music. The air smelled of truffle, wine, and something citrusy I couldn't place. And then I saw them. Elias, my son, standing beside a long table near the windows. He looked uncomfortable. He wore a charcoal suit, a pale shirt, and polished shoes. His posture was stiff, shoulders tight. He kept glancing between the entrance and the table with the nerves of a man waiting for a disaster. Beside him stood Claire, my daughter-in-law, tall, elegant, poised. Her dress, a white fitted satin piece, looked expensive enough to pay someone's rent. Her hair fell in perfect waves. Her expression, however, was tense, embarrassed. Not a good sign. At the table already seated were Claire's parents. Her mother, Evelyn Hartman, wore a deep emerald gown embroidered with crystals. Diamonds sparkled at her throat, wrists, and fingers. Her hair was a polished blonde, perfectly set, clearly touched by the hands of a high-end salon. Her father, Roland Hartman, sat with a posture I'd seen 100 times in boardrooms, a man used to authority, used to people leaning in when he spoke. His tailored suit looked Italian. His watch probably cost the same as a small apartment. Evelyn noticed me first. Her eyes scanned my dress, my shoes, my bag, my hair, and then her expression changed. First confusion, then disbelief, then a shadow of something colder, disapproval. Claire turned, then Elias. My son's face dropped. He tried to mask it. God, he tried. But I saw the flicker of embarrassment flash right across his features. "Mom, you made it." "I did," I replied gently. "Hello, sweetheart." He kissed my cheek, but his body was stiff. He grabbed my arm quickly, as if trying to block others' view. "Mom, you didn't have to dress like this," he whispered urgently. "I dressed as I usually do." His jaw clenched. Claire approached, smiling with her lips but not her eyes. "Hi, Mrs. Bennett. You look comfortable." Comfortable. The way people described outdated sofas and airport chairs. "Thank you," I said, letting the words hang. Elias led me to the table. Mom, this is Claire's mother, Evelyn, and her father, Roland. Evelyn gave me a tight-lipped smile, the kind women give when they smell something unpleasant but are too polite to comment. Roland didn't even stand. He only nodded, eyes sweeping over me like I was a piece of furniture he wouldn't buy. It's a pleasure, I said warmly, taking my seat. No one replied, not even a polite murmur. The waiter brought menus, but Evelyn didn't touch hers. Instead, she leaned toward Claire and whispered something behind her hand. Claire's cheeks flushed. Roland gave a small, low chuckle. I pretended not to notice, but, of course, I did. I noticed everything. Because while they thought I was a poor, naive woman who had stumbled into a place she didn't belong, they didn't know who I really was. And they had no idea what secret of theirs I would uncover before the night was over. A secret that would destroy them.
The waiter approached with a polite smile, placing a leather-bound wine list on the table. Evelyn took it immediately, of course, and began flipping through the pages with the confidence of someone who believed they owned the place. Roland leaned back in his chair, one arm draped behind Claire's seat. His posture screamed entitlement. His eyes scanned the room, not the menu. People like him didn't need menus. They needed attention. "Shall we order something sophisticated?" Evelyn said loudly, loud enough that two nearby tables turned. Claire gave a forced laugh. "Mom, it's just dinner." Evelyn hummed, not really listening. "Well, some of us appreciate refinement. Isn't that right, Roland?" Roland smirked, naturally. Elias shot me a look. He was begging me to just go along, to be silent, to play small so he wouldn't be embarrassed. He didn't realize I had already decided to play smaller than they ever imagined. I let my hands rest gently on my faded canvas tote, keeping my posture humble, my expression soft. Let them think I was fragile. Let them underestimate me. It would make what was coming even more devastating. The waiter returned. "Would you like to begin with something to drink?" Evelyn didn't wait for anyone. "We'll have the Chateau d'Arsac Margaux, 1989. "That bottle is—" the waiter began. "I know what it costs," Evelyn snapped. Of course she did. The waiter nodded and left. Elias shifted uncomfortably. Claire looked proud. Roland looked smug. And I looked down at my worn dress, pretending to smooth the fabric. "Do you drink wine, Mrs. Bennet?" Evelyn asked suddenly. I looked up. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "I do, occasionally," I said simply. "Occasionally," she repeated. "I assume you prefer simpler wines, maybe something boxed." Claire pressed her lips together. Elias froze. Roland chuckled. I smiled politely. "I'm not picky." I could feel Evelyn's satisfaction. She wanted me small. She wanted me embarrassed. She wanted the hierarchy to be clear. Her family above, mine below. But she had no idea the woman she was trying to humiliate had signed off on wine budgets larger than her annual salary. A minute later, the wine arrived. The waiter poured a small amount into Roland's glass. He swirled it expertly, sniffed it, took a sip, nodded. "Acceptable," he said. "Acceptable. God help me." After the wine was poured, the waiter handed us menus. That's when Evelyn leaned forward. "Mrs. Bennet, I hope you don't feel uncomfortable," she said sweetly, poisonously. "This restaurant might be a little outside your usual range." I let myself look a little nervous, glancing around as if overwhelmed. "It is very beautiful," I said quietly, "much nicer than the places I'm used to." Evelyn gave a bright, victorious smile. "Of course. Elias told us you live simply." Claire added quickly, "Mom, maybe don't—" "Oh, nonsense," Evelyn said, waving her off. "There's no shame in modesty. My husband and I have always believed people should know their place."
People should know their place. I felt a cold wave roll through me. Elias looked mortified but said nothing. Claire sipped her wine. I folded my hands in my lap, keeping my expression soft, mild, exactly what they expected. Elias, Roland said suddenly, tell me again what your mother does. You said something about office work? Before Elias could respond, Evelyn interjected. He said she works at some small agency or something with papers. A clerk. A clerk. A clerk. I took a quiet breath. I handled documents, I said mildly. Not a lie. I handled documents worth millions. Evelyn nodded, satisfied. How nice. A humble job. Roland added, respectable in its own way, I suppose. Respectable in the way one might describe a stray dog that learned a trick. The waiter returned to take our orders. Evelyn chose something with truffle. Roland picked a steak. Claire went for pasta. Elias chose salmon. And you, ma'am, the waiter asked me gently. I pretended to hesitate, glancing nervously at the menu. What do you recommend that's affordable? Elias closed his eyes. Claire's breath caught. Evelyn smirked. I'll have the chicken soup, I said softly. Evelyn raised her eyebrows. Chicken soup? At a place like this? I don't want to be a burden. I'm not used to these prices. That was it. That was the moment Evelyn really let her guard down. She looked at me like a scientist inspecting a harmless creature. Oh, don't worry, dear, she patted my hand condescendingly. Elias is paying tonight. Actually, Elias said quietly, I thought... Oh, naturally, Evelyn cut in. Young men should provide, especially for a mother like you. A mother like me. My pulse remained steady. I had survived Wall Street executives. I had survived market crashes. I could survive this table of fragile egos. Dinner continued with superficial chatter. Travel, luxury brands, Claire's childhood in Geneva, Roland's business ventures, Evelyn's charity galas that helped the poor, people she clearly despised. And then came the moment, the one that would set everything in motion. Evelyn placed her wineglass down and leaned in slightly. So, Mrs. Bennet, where exactly do you live? Claire mentioned something about a small apartment. Her voice was drenched in sugar, poisonous sugar. I nodded gently. Yes, a very small place. Old building, nothing fancy. She smiled sympathetically. Do you rent? I do. A long-term lease? 22 years. Roland scoffed. 22 years? In the same tiny apartment? Evelyn shook her head dramatically. How admirable. I suppose some people get attached to simple things. Claire looked pained. Elias stared at his plate. I tilted my head. Where do you live, Mrs. Hartman? Evelyn brightened instantly. We have a home in Geneva, one in Lucerne, a summer property in Lake Como, and an apartment in Manhattan. Roland does well, you see. Roland lifted his glass, enjoying the recognition. Impressive, I said quietly. Oh, it is, Evelyn replied. We've worked hard to build a comfortable life. We believe in maintaining standards, especially for our daughter. She was raised among successful people, people with pedigree. Her eyes flicked to my dress. Claire deserves the best. I kept my smile soft. I'm glad she found happiness. Oh, she did, Evelyn said. Elias is lucky, of course, but Claire has always had choices, many choices, but love brought them together. Roland snorted. Love is easier when both families are aligned, financially, socially, intellectually. I felt something click quietly into place. This wasn't just arrogance. This wasn't just judgment. This was something else. A reason, a motive, a subtle push. And suddenly I understood something I hadn't before. Claire's parents weren't simply snobs. They expected someone wealthier, more influential, more worthy of connection. Maybe they hadn't approved of Elias at first. Maybe Claire marrying him caused friction. Maybe this dinner was their chance to confirm, or reject, him. My son was being evaluated, and I was the metric. Then Evelyn said the sentence that confirmed everything. When Claire told us she was marrying someone from a modest background, we thought, well, we hoped his family might at least have potential. Potential. I suppose it's fortunate that Claire's career doesn't depend on connections. I rested my hands on the table. And what career is that? Evelyn beamed. She's set to join our family foundation, a prestigious position, high visibility. We run events with major donors from Europe and the U.S. It requires presentation, polished presentation. Her gaze slid to my bargain bin dress again. And we value families who represent us well. There it was, the entire truth in one sentence. They didn't want a daughter-in-law whose mother-in-law came from modest roots. They didn't want poor blood in their line. They didn't want Elias unless he elevated their social image. And then Evelyn said the sentence I would never forget. Don't take this personally, Mrs. Bennet. Some people are made for elegance, others for simpler lives. She smiled. And at that exact moment, I saw the secret, a tiny detail, a slip, a sign that the Hartman family wasn't what they claimed to be, a sign that would unravel everything, a sign that would destroy them. For a full heartbeat after Evelyn's careless smile, the entire table seemed to fall into a strange stillness, like everyone was waiting for someone else to breathe first. The orchestra in the back played something soft and distant, but here, at this glossy white tablecloth, under crystal chandeliers, the air felt colder. Evelyn lifted her wine glass again, unaware of the shift. Roland adjusted his cufflinks. Claire smoothed her dress. Everyone moved like nothing had changed. Except Elias. My son's eyes were locked on me, not on my dress, not on the tote bag, not the humble posture I was deliberately maintaining. He was studying my face. Hard, searching for something, trying to understand something he couldn't name yet. I didn't look back at him, not fully. I kept my gaze soft, almost timid, but from the corner of my eye, I saw the tension in his jaw, the uncertainty creeping into his shoulders, the confusion settling behind his polite expression. He had noticed, not the Hartman secret, not the detail that had slipped from Evelyn's facade, not yet, but he had noticed me, not the mother he'd grown up with, the one who let the world assume she was ordinary, the one who blended into the background, the one who never demanded space or recognition. Tonight, he saw something else. He didn't know what it was, but he felt it, and it was terrifying him. He shifted in his seat. "Mom," he said quietly, a tone only meant for me. "Are you okay?" Evelyn and Roland kept talking over him, complaining about the wine temperature and the lighting and the American tendency to overdress or underdress, never in between. Claire pretended to listen to them, but her eyes darted toward Elias too, sensing something she couldn't quite identify. I turned gently toward my son. "I'm fine, Elias," I said with the faintest smile. "Why wouldn't I be?" He blinked. Once, twice, 3 times. Like he was waiting for a different answer. His fingers tapped lightly on the table, a nervous habit he hadn't had since his university exams 15 years ago. Back then, I could read his stress in seconds. Tonight, it was the same rhythm.
Tap, 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 tap. He was worried, but not about me being insulted. That wasn't the root of it. He was worried because I wasn't acting like someone being insulted. "You're really okay?" he asked again, lower this time. "You don't seem upset." Evelyn glanced at him briefly, annoyed that he was paying attention to me instead of admiring her pearl earrings. She waved the waiter over to adjust something. Roland began scrolling through his phone. The world kept moving, but Elias didn't. His eyes stayed on me, searching, confused, almost afraid. I tilted my head. "You think I should be upset?" "You think—" He swallowed. "I don't know what I think. You're so calm." He said the last word like it was a crime. I folded my hands on my lap. "Calm is good, isn't it?" "No," he whispered. "Not like this." His voice trembled with something deeper. Years of assuming I was weak, humble, ordinary, and suddenly discovering none of those labels fit. I watched him, not breaking character, not letting even a flicker of my real self show. "Elias, sweetheart," I said softly, "I'm just trying to make everyone comfortable." He shook his head slowly. "That's not it." He leaned slightly closer, lowering his voice further. "Mom, you're not even flinching." I let silence sit between us. Let him wrestle with his thoughts. Let him sink into the realization that something didn't add up. Elias finally looked away, exhaling shakily. He reached for his wine glass and nearly spilled it, catching it mid-tip with a trembling hand. His shoulders tightened, his breath came uneven, his eyes kept flicking back at me as though I might suddenly tear off a mask. He didn't know what I was hiding. He didn't know why I was so composed, but he knew, instinctively, that I was not the person he thought I was. Every second of me appearing smaller only made the truth feel larger in his mind. Across the table, the conversation resumed around us. Roland was boasting about his European board connections. Evelyn was describing a gala in Zurich where she gracefully rejected a donation from a man wearing a polyester tie. Clara kept nodding, pretending to admire them. But Elias's world had shrunk to a pinpoint. Me. He studied the way I lifted my water glass, steady hands, the way I sat, upright, composed, the way I reacted, or didn't, to Evelyn's barbs. He noticed everything, even the smallest details. How my eyes moved, how my breath stayed even, how my shoulders remained relaxed, while he himself was tensing up with every passing moment.
He whispered again, more to himself than to me, "You're too calm." And then, slowly, cautiously, he looked at the Hardmans, at Evelyn's excessive jewelry, at Roland's overconfident posture, at Claire's forced smile. Then he looked back at me. His eyebrows drew together. Suspicion flickered in his eyes for the first time, not toward them, but toward me. He didn't know any secrets yet. He hadn't seen the crack in the Hartman facade. He hadn't caught the detail I caught. He didn't know his wife's family was hiding something, but he did understand one truth. His mother knew something he didn't, something she wasn't saying. He opened his mouth again, but stopped. He was afraid of what he might ask, afraid of what I might answer, afraid of learning something that would shift the ground under him. His fingers tapped again. Tap, 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 tap. He glanced around the restaurant, at the expensive decor, at the polished floor, at the servers dressed in immaculate uniforms, at the guests with diamond watches and designer heels. Then he looked at me, his mother in an old dress, a faded tote bag at her side, hair pulled back in a plain ponytail. But this time, he didn't see a poor woman trying to fit in. He saw someone performing poverty, someone who didn't belong here. not because she couldn't afford it, but because she didn't seem intimidated at all by the luxury. That's when Elias's breathing changed again. He finally whispered, "Mom, how are you so calm around them? How are you not hurt?" I let my expression soften further. "Why would I be hurt?" "They're insulting you," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "They're looking down on you. They're treating you like I'm beneath them," I offered gently. He flinched. "Yeah." I shrugged softly. "That doesn't bother me." "But it should," he insisted. "Does it bother you?" I asked. "Yes," he said instantly. "Of course it does." I nodded slowly. "Then maybe that's enough." He stared at me like the sentence was a riddle. Behind him, Evelyn started laughing loudly about champagne requirements at Swiss weddings. Roland checked his watch. Claire rubbed her temples. But Elias didn't hear any of it. He was too busy drowning in questions. Questions he wasn't ready to ask. Questions I wasn't ready to answer. Not yet, because the night was just beginning, and he had no idea how deep it would cut. The moment hung in the air like a held breath. Elias sat stiff beside me, brows drawn together, questions swirling inside him like a rising storm he couldn't control. But before he could gather another word, before he could ask anything else, something subtle shifted in the space between us. Claire moved. Not dramatically, not loudly, just a small, sharp movement. Her hand tightening around her napkin, her shoulders pulling inward for a split second, her breath catching in her throat. Almost invisible, almost nothing, but not to me. I'd spent years reading faces, real ones, dangerous ones, deceptive ones. Claire wasn't any of those things. But she was hiding something, and her body had begun to betray her. Her eyes darted, first toward her mother, then toward Roland, then toward me. Quick, nervous flickers, as if she expected someone to say something wrong at any second, as if she were bracing herself for impact, as if she were terrified that some truth, some secret, some carefully buried thing might rise to the surface. She didn't sip her wine this time. She didn't laugh politely. She didn't even adjust her dress. She just froze and then looked away. Evelyn continued rambling loudly about some charity event where a European duke had complimented her impeccable taste. Roland checked his emails again, barely listening. Neither of them noticed Claire's tension, but Elias did. His eyes flicked to her for a moment, confused. His fingers paused mid-tap. His lips parted slightly, about to ask her something. But Claire quickly looked down at her plate and offered a shaky smile that fooled no one, especially not me. She was unraveling, thread by thread, trying desperately to hold herself together while her family kept talking like nothing was wrong. Elias finally whispered her name. "Claire, you okay?" She nodded too quickly. "I'm fine." The lie was thin, fragile, nearly translucent. Her voice didn't have its usual warmth. It carried a brittle edge, like it might splinter if touched. She reached for her water glass but stopped halfway, hand hovering awkwardly above the table, before withdrawing it entirely. Evelyn didn't notice. Honestly, the gala in Zurich was beneath standard last year. The guest list was outrageously pedestrian. I had to explain why certain families simply didn't belong. Reputation matters, you know. These events are about prestige. Claire's jaw tightened. Just barely, but enough for me to see the crack. Elias saw it too. His gaze traveled from Claire's face to her rigid posture, then back to me, seeking answers he wasn't ready to voice. His entire body leaned subtly in her direction, protective but unsure. Claire didn't meet his eyes. Instead, she glanced across the restaurant again. Not at the chandelier, not at the servers, not at the other tables. She looked at the exit. For half a second, a flicker, a wish to run. Interesting. Her fingers clenched around her napkin again. Her breath came quicker, shallower, almost imperceptibly so. She had rehearsed being composed, elegant, polished, a Hartman air. But something tonight was slicing through that performance. She finally looked at me, and for the first time since the dinner began, she didn't force the smile. Her eyes held something else. Fear. Not of me, not of Elias, but of the truth. Of something behind them, something bigger than them, something she had been carrying too long, something she didn't want to surface. I held her gaze, gentle but steady, watching her facade tremble. Claire broke eye contact instantly and reached for her wineglass, taking a large sip, too large, too fast. A drop spilled on the back of her hand. She flinched as though it burned. Roland barely looked up. "Careful, Claire." His tone wasn't caring. It was corrective, a warning wrapped in fatherly softness. Claire shrank slightly deeper into her chair. My son noticed that too. "Claire," Elias said again, voice firmer now, concern edging into frustration. "What's going on?" "Nothing," she whispered, shaking her head. "I'm fine." The lie was thin, fragile, nearly translucent. Her voice didn't have its usual warmth. It carried a brittle edge, like it might splinter if touched. She reached for her water glass but stopped halfway, hand hovering awkwardly above the table, before withdrawing it entirely. Evelyn didn't notice. Honestly, the gala in Zurich was beneath standard last year. The guest list was outrageously pedestrian. I had to explain why certain families simply didn't belong. Reputation matters, you know. These events are about prestige. Claire's jaw tightened. Just barely. But enough for me to see the crack. Elias saw it too. His gaze traveled from Claire's face to her rigid posture, then back to me, seeking answers he wasn't ready to voice. His entire body leaned subtly in her direction, protective, but unsure. Claire didn't meet his eyes. Instead, she glanced across the restaurant again. Not at the chandelier, not at the servers, not at the other tables. She looked at the exit. For half a second, a flicker, a wish to run. Interesting. Her fingers clenched around her napkin again. Her breaths came quicker, shallower, almost imperceptibly so. She had rehearsed being composed, elegant, polished, a Hartman air. But something tonight was slicing through that performance. She finally looked at me, and for the first time since the dinner began, she didn't force the smile. Her eyes held something else. Fear. Not of me, not of Elias, but of the truth. Of something behind them, something bigger than them, something she had been carrying too long, something she didn't want to surface. I held her gaze, gentle but steady, watching her facade tremble. Claire broke eye contact instantly and reached for her wineglass, taking a large sip, too large, too fast. A drop spilled on the back of her hand. She flinched as though it burned. Roland barely looked up. "Careful, Claire." His tone wasn't caring. It was corrective, a warning wrapped in fatherly softness. Claire shrank slightly deeper into her chair. My son noticed that too. "Claire," Elias said again, voice firmer now, concern edging into frustration. "What's going on?" "Nothing," she whispered again, shaking her head. "I'm fine." But the lie wavered. Her eyes darted, her breath hitched. And Evelyn finally noticed something, though she misread it entirely. "Claire, darling, you're probably tired. Marriage planning is so exhausting.
And of course you want to impress everyone. It's natural. Claire swallowed. Impress everyone. A horrible phrase echoed behind her eyes. Evelyn reached over and touched her daughter's hand, a gesture that looked gentle but felt rehearsed. You want to present our family well, I know. But don't worry. Roland and I will make sure everything is elegant. Perfect. Claire's shoulders stiffened again. Elias's confusion deepened. Present your family? What does that even mean? Claire cut him off. Mom, please. But Evelyn wasn't listening. Appearances matter, sweetheart, especially when entering high society. People judge the entire family, not just the couple. Her glance flicked intentionally toward me. My humble dress, my simple bag, my calmness. A silent dagger disguised as etiquette.
Claire saw it. Claire hated it. Claire's lips parted like she wanted to speak, wanted to confess something, but she couldn't. Not with her parents there. Not under their eyes. Not under the weight of their expectations. She reached for her water again. Her hand trembled. She spilled a few drops onto the tablecloth. This time, Elias noticed instantly. He grabbed a napkin and dabbed the water before it spread. "Hey," he whispered. "Talk to me." Claire blinked rapidly. "It's nothing." But her voice carried panic now. She looked at me again, only for a heartbeat, but the look spoke volumes. "Please don't push. Not here." And there it was, recognition. She knew. She knew I'd caught it. She knew I'd seen the slip in her mother's words at the end of part 2. She knew I'd noticed what the Hartmans didn't want seen. And she also knew I wasn't reacting, not because I was intimidated, but because I was waiting. Her fear wasn't of the secret itself. Her fear was of something already discovered, something I hadn't said aloud yet, something she didn't want anyone else to realize. Evelyn kept babbling about donor dinners and Swiss aristocrats. Roland made a comment about keeping one's origins discreet in professional circles. Their voices blended into a blur of classism and arrogance. But Claire wasn't listening. She was scanning their faces, her mother's smug smile, her father's indifference, her fiancé's confusion, and every second made her shrink further into herself. Her eye settled back on me, and finally, I saw it clearly. Guilt. Not her guilt. Not guilt for marrying below her family. Not guilt for what they thought of me. No, this guilt was different. This was the guilt of someone who had been living with a lie she didn't create, but was forced to maintain, a lie she'd hoped would never come out, a lie her family needed to survive. And I had caught a fragment of that lie without even trying. Claire lowered her eyes and whispered, barely loud enough to hear, "I'm sorry." Elias heard it too. "For what?" She shook her head quickly, wiping her palms on her dress. "Nothing, forget it." But Elias wasn't letting it go. "Claire..." Her chair scraped softly against the floor as she shifted, uneasy. "Elias, please, not now." That tiny plea carried so much weight it practically bent the air. Evelyn noticed that part. "Is everything all right, dear?" Claire nodded. "I'm fine." The lie fractured midair. Evelyn, oblivious, returned to her monologue. Roland resumed scrolling through his phone. But Elias kept staring at Claire, confusion darkening into something heavier. Suspicion, fear, protectiveness, a growing sense that something wasn't right in her world. And Claire kept avoiding his gaze. Finally, I saw it clearly. Guilt. Not her guilt. Not guilt for marrying below her family. Not guilt for what they thought of me. No, this guilt was different. This was the guilt of someone who had been living with a lie she didn't create, but was forced to maintain, a lie she'd hoped would never come out, a lie her family needed to survive. And I had caught a fragment of that lie without even trying. Clara lowered her eyes and whispered, barely loud enough to hear, "I'm sorry." Elias heard it too. "For what?" She shook her head quickly, wiping her palms on her dress. "Nothing, forget it." But Elias wasn't letting it go. Claire, her chair scraped softly against the floor as she shifted, uneasy. Elias, please, not now. That tiny plea carried so much weight it practically bent the air. Evelyn noticed that part. Is everything all right? Claire nodded. I'm fine. The life fractured midair. Evelyn, oblivious, returned to her monologue, and Roland resumed scrolling through his phone. But Elias kept staring at Claire, confusion darkening into something heavier, suspicion, fear, protectiveness, a growing sense that something wasn't right in her world, and Claire kept avoiding his gaze. Finally, she turned toward me again, eyes glassy, voice trembling so quietly only I heard, "You saw it, didn't you?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. My silence was enough. Claire inhaled sharply, panic skittering across her expression. She quickly looked away, trembling. Elias watched between the two of us like he was witnessing a conversation taking place without words. He could feel something was wrong. He could sense Claire was cracking. He knew, deep down, that she was carrying something he didn't want him to know. But he didn't know what. Not yet. And Claire? She wasn't afraid of the secret itself. She was afraid it had finally reached someone who recognized the smell of a lie. Her mother noticed none of this. But I did. And Claire realized that was the most dangerous thing of all.
The clinking of silverware echoed sharply in the dining room, the kind of sterile, high society quiet that felt less like comfort and more like scrutiny. The Hartmans sat like statues, poised, polished, perfect in every visible layer, but visibly disturbed in the invisible ones. And Margaret could taste it all from her seat, like a faint metallic tension in the air. She kept her back straight, shoulders relaxed, eyes warm and soft, still wearing the gentle, slightly timid expression of a poor mother trying her best to fit into a wealthy family's world. Yet beneath that softness, something sharper shimmered, quiet and observant. Elias sat beside her, glancing between his mother and the Hartmans, the conflict inside him growing heavier with every breath. Claire, across the table, kept shifting in her seat, her fingers nervously tracing the edge of her napkin. But the first spark came from Roland Hartman. He lowered his fork with a slow, deliberate clink and glanced at Margaret with a smirk. One that wasn't playful or friendly, but the kind that came from a man who enjoyed subtle cruelty. "So, Margaret," he said, voice dripping with polite condescension, "I hope the meal isn't too overwhelming for you. We know fine dining can sometimes be intimidating for those who aren't accustomed to it." Evelyn let out a soft chuckle, small, sharp, elegant, and pointed like a pin dipped in poison. Claire froze, her eyes darting sharply toward her father. Even Elias stiffened. But Margaret simply blinked once, twice, and then smiled the gentlest, most unbothered smile imaginable. "Oh dear," she said warmly, "food is food, whether it's served on a silver plate or wrapped in grocery paper. It ends up in the same place, doesn't it?" Evelyn's smile faltered. Roland's jaw tightened. The atmosphere shifted by a single degree, but it was enough. Margaret lifted her wine glass, swirled it lightly, and glanced around the table with a soft curiosity. She looked every bit the simple, humble mother, but her eyes gleamed as if she could see straight through them. Then she added, almost casually, "Some things look expensive, but aren't, you know. Some things are just pretending." The entire table went still. It wasn't dramatic stillness. No one gasped, no one dropped anything. But their posture changed, their eyes sharpened. Something invisible recoiled inside them. Roland froze, mid-reach for his glass. Evelyn's hand tensed on her fork. Claire slowly swallowed, her throat visibly tightening. Elias turned to look at his mother, eyes narrowing. He knew that tone. It was the tone she used when she was hinting at something bigger. Something she wasn't saying out loud. But he didn't know what she was hinting at now. He just knew his mother wasn't speaking randomly. Margaret kept her smile soft, innocent like she had no idea she'd struck a nerve. "Oh," she said brightly,
when she noticed the sudden silence. "I'm so sorry. I just meant sometimes things aren't what they seem." She laughed softly, playing the role of the naive, harmless mother with flawless precision. But the damage was already done. The Hartmans heard the hidden message. Roland's voice came out too quickly. "And what exactly do you mean by that?" Margaret widened her eyes, feigning confusion. "About what things seem? Oh, nothing at all. Just general talk, small talk. You know how silly I can be." Evelyn's smile returned, but now it looked forced, stretched too thin across her face. Claire's anxiety spiked again. She stared at Margaret as if trying to decode something, trying to understand if the older woman knew something. Elias noticed Claire's reaction, and he noticed Roland's clenched jaw and Evelyn's rigid posture. His frown deepened. "They're nervous, but why? What could my mother possibly know?" He had no answer, but the tension in the room had become a tangible thing, like a storm cloud slowly forming above the table. The next few minutes passed in stiff silence. Claire poked at her food more than she ate it. Roland drank his wine faster. Evelyn kept smoothing the tablecloth as if every wrinkle offended her. Margaret stayed exactly as she'd been, soft, gentle, composed. But she didn't miss a single detail. She saw Claire's trembling hands. She saw Evelyn's darting eyes. She saw Roland watching her with a suspicion of a man who feared being exposed. Margaret had been around long enough to recognize fear when she saw it. And the Hartmans, wealthy and refined as they were, looked terrified under her harmless smile. She couldn't help it. Her curiosity deepened. What is this family hiding? Why are they so afraid of a single comment from a poor, harmless mother? Her mind worked, quietly, silently, behind the facade of innocence. Finally, Roland forced a laugh. "Well then," he said, voice tight, "let's change the subject." "Yes," Evelyn added quickly, "no need for pointless, philosophical remarks during dinner." Margaret smiled sweetly. "Of course. I didn't mean to make things heavy." The room tightened again because they knew she had made things heavy, and whether she meant to or not, they couldn't tell.
Claire cleared her throat, voice small. "Mom, Dad, maybe relax a little. Margaret didn't mean anything." Roland shot Claire a warning look. Evelyn reached for her water glass with trembling fingers. Margaret watched quietly. "Claire's protecting me, or protecting herself. She knows something, doesn't she? She's caught between her family and her husband and me." Margaret didn't want to push too hard, yet. Not tonight. But she was no fool. The Hartmans were rattled, shaken by nothing more than a sentence. Why? What are they terrified of? A few moments later, Evelyn forced a bright, artificial smile. "So, Elias, how was work? Still settling into the new office?" Elias blinked, surprised at the sudden shift. Yeah, it's fine. Nothing unusual." Margaret noticed the way Evelyn clung to the word normal, almost desperately. Roland chimed in too quickly. Yes, normal is good. Stability is important, especially in families like ours." The emphasis wasn't subtle. Margaret tilted her head slightly. "And what kind of family is yours?" The question was gentle, almost innocent, but the effect was instant. Roland stiffened. "We're respected, established." "Trusted," added Evelyn sharply. Claire pressed her lips together. Margaret nodded slowly. "I see." The silence that followed was suffocating. Elias felt sweat building in his palms. He felt like he was watching a chess match, one he didn't understand, one where he wasn't sure of the rules or the stakes. He glanced at his mother, then at the Hartmans, then at Claire. Why was everyone so tense? Why was everyone watching each other like prey? He suddenly wished he could pull his mother aside and ask her what she was doing, but he couldn't. Not here. Not while everyone was pretending nothing was wrong.
Margaret could almost feel her son's eyes on her. She turned to him and smiled, soft and reassuring. But inside, she felt the weight of something much larger pressing against the edges of the room. She spoke again, calmly. "Dinner is lovely. Truly, everything tastes very polished." Evelyn blinked. "Polished?" "Oh, yes," Margaret said, nodding sweetly. "Some things shine so beautifully on the outside, but shine doesn't tell you what's underneath, does it?" It was a gentle voice, but the meaning landed like a stone dropped into still water. Roland sat forward, jaw clenching so tightly a muscle twitched in his cheek. "What exactly are you implying?" "Nothing," Margaret said innocently. "Just conversation. I'm not implying anything at all." Claire whispered, "Dad, stop." Evelyn's hand squeezed Claire's arm. "Don't." Margaret saw everything, and she knew, without question, that this family was hiding a secret so fragile they couldn't even tolerate metaphors. Interesting. But she said none of that aloud. Instead, she lowered her eyes modestly and cut a small piece of her food, as if unaware she had just shaken the entire table. The silence stretched so long it became almost unbearable. Finally, Claire gathered enough courage to speak. Her voice was soft but trembling. "Margaret, I'm really glad you're here." Margaret looked up, surprised not by the words, but by the sincerity trembling beneath them. Claire meant it, truly meant it, and that alone told Margaret something powerful. Claire feels unsafe, even in her own home. Margaret smiled at her gently. "I'm glad to be here too, dear." Roland looked from Claire to Margaret with burning resentment in his eyes. The softness between the two women clearly irritated him. Evelyn took a deep breath, her voice brittle. "Let's all calm down. No one is accusing anyone of anything." "Of course not," Margaret echoed sweetly. "No one said anyone was pretending." The word hit like a knife. Roland slammed his fork down, just slightly too hard. Elias flinched. Claire shut her eyes for a moment. Margaret kept her smile. The tension reached its peak as Roland leaned forward, eyes locked on Margaret with icy intensity. "You know, in families like ours, we value transparency." "I do too." "We dislike ambiguity." "So do I." "We expect people to be honest about who they are." Margaret held his gaze for a quiet, steady moment. Then she smiled. "Oh, I'm very honest about who I am. Maybe more honest than you think." The words were soft, but they were a challenge, a warning, a mirror. Evelyn's breath hitched. Claire froze. Elias felt his heart racing without knowing why. Roland's fingers tightened around the stem of his wineglass until his knuckles turned white. The air felt ready to snap. This was the spark, not the explosion, not yet, but the beginning of the fire. The moment when pretense cracked, when tension sharpened, when the first lines in the sand were drawn. Margaret looked around the table one last time, reading every expression, every fear, every secret. Then she lowered her gaze again, pretending not to notice the tremors she had caused. Evelyn's hand tightened around the envelope, like she feared someone might snatch it away. The manager gave a stiff nod and walked off without a word, leaving behind a trail of tension thick enough to taste. The Hartmans exchanged glances, quiet, sharp, alarmed glances, and for the first time all evening, none of them attempted to hide their expressions. Roland leaned closer to Evelyn, his jaw rigid. "Why here?" he muttered. "Why now?" Evelyn didn't answer. She slowly slid the envelope beneath her napkin, fingers trembling ever so slightly, but enough for me to notice. Claire looked like she might faint. Her wineglass was still halfway to her lips, untouched, frozen mid-motion. Elias didn't notice the envelope at first. He was too busy staring at me, trying to understand something he couldn't yet articulate. He kept whispering through the silence. "Mom, what's going on? Why are you so calm? Why are they... What is this?" I didn't answer. I kept my eyes lowered, playing the same role I'd played all night, the role that now gave me more power than any title I had ever held. The meek mother, the quiet woman, the nobody. People revealed their deepest truths in front of those they underestimated, and that was exactly what I needed right now. Roland cleared his throat harshly. "We should wrap this up," he said, trying to sound casual, but failing. "It's late." The waiter wasn't even approaching with dessert yet. Evelyn forced a smile. "Yes, maybe we should." But Claire shook her head very slightly, almost imperceptibly. Her eyes, a mixture of panic and guilt, stayed glued to the envelope, then flickered toward me. Something inside her seemed to break a little each passing second. I caught it. A daughter torn between her wealthy, polished parents and a truth she had been avoiding. Someone who had been raised on lies, but never quite developed the heart strong enough to live with them. Claire opened her mouth as if to speak, but Roland shot her a warning glare. It silenced her immediately. The Hartmans were cracking, and they didn't even realize I had started pulling the thread. The waiter approached cautiously. "Would you like coffee or dessert?" "No," Roland snapped. "Yes," I said softly. All eyes shot toward me. I smiled gently at the waiter. "A small cup of black coffee, please." Roland's nostrils flared with irritation. Evelyn glared at me like I had committed a crime. Claire looked relieved. Elias looked confused, but for once, he didn't stop me. The waiter nodded and retreated. Evelyn leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Mrs. Bennet, this evening has gone long enough, don't you think?" I tilted my head slightly, giving her the most innocent expression I could. "Are we in a hurry? I'm enjoying the evening." Enjoying watching their masks slip, enjoying the unraveling. Roland took a sip of wine, but his hand shook. He tried to cover it by shifting in his chair. "We simply have other engagements," he said stiffly. I nodded. "Of course, important people often have busy evenings." His jaw tightened. That comment struck deeper than you wanted to admit. Claire finally spoke. "Mom, Dad, maybe we should just relax." "Relax," Evelyn hissed softly, turning to her daughter. "Do you have any idea?" "Evelyn," Roland cut in sharply. She stopped. My coffee arrived, and the aroma drifted between us, strangely grounding. I lifted the cup, taking a slow sip, letting the moment stretch like a taut wire. Evelyn quickly slipped the envelope into her bag, but not before I caught a glimpse of what was printed on the front. Private notice, donor compliance review. Ah, so that was it. Not a personal letter, not a friendly update. A compliance review from donors for their foundation, the Hartman Foundation, the grand, prestigious, international philanthropic empire they bragged about all dinner. My eyes flicked toward Claire. Her fingers were clenched into tight fists in her lap, knuckles white. Her throat bobbed with a hard swallow. I caught it. A daughter torn between her wealthy, polished parents and a truth she had been avoiding. Someone who had been raised on lies, but never quite developed the heart strong enough to live with them. Claire opened her mouth as if to speak, but Roland shot her a warning glare. It silenced her immediately. The Hartmans were cracking, and they didn't even realize I had started pulling the thread.
I set the coffee cup down gently. "Evelyn," I said softly. Her head snapped toward me,
surprised I dared speak to her directly now. "Is everything all right?" Her lips curled. Of course, everything is always all right. But the way her voice trembled revealed the lie. Roland leaned forward, eyes cold. "Mrs. Bennet, some things are too complicated for people outside our circle. Best not to ask questions." I gave him a soft, fragile smile, the smile they believed belonged to a powerless woman. "Oh, I understand," I said sweetly. "Sometimes things look impressive from the outside, but on the inside, they might not be as stable as they appear." Something electric crackled across the table. Evelyn's hand froze midair. Roland's eyes widened. Not much, but enough. Claire inhaled sharply, pressing a hand over her mouth. Elias's brow furrowed. "What do you mean by that?" "Huh?" I blinked innocently. "Just speaking generally. Sometimes things look expensive, but aren't. Some things are just pretending." Claire gasped. Roland stiffened completely. Evelyn's lips parted in horror. And Elias, my son, looked between us like he had missed the first half of a movie, but knew something monumental was happening. "Mom," he whispered, "how did you mean that?" I turned to him, brushing lightly at my wrinkled dress, as if embarrassed. "Nothing, dear. Just something I've learned over the years. Appearances can deceive. Sometimes people hide things. Sometimes they present themselves as something they're not. Happens in all circles." Evelyn abruptly slammed her wine glass down, the sharp crack drawing the attention of nearby tables. "I will not tolerate—" "Evelyn," Roland growled, gripping her wrist. "Not now." The couple exchanged a rapid, tense look, full of silent commands. Claire suddenly stood up. Everyone jumped. Her chair scraped loudly across the expensive floor. "I can't do this," she whispered, voice shaking. "I can't keep lying." "Claire!" Evelyn barked, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Roland stood up halfway, grasping the edge of the table as if ready to intervene. But Claire wasn't looking at them. She was looking at me. Her eyes were full of something that broke through the mask she'd been wearing all night. Fear, guilt, shame, and relief. "Mrs. Bennet," she whispered, "I'm so sorry." Roland's chair screeched back as he stood fully. "Claire, sit down." "No." Claire's voice grew stronger. "No, Dad, I'm tired." Evelyn hissed. "You will not embarrass us." Claire turned to her, her voice trembling with emotion. "Mom, we're already embarrassing ourselves." The entire restaurant had gone quiet. Roland took a threatening step toward Claire, lowering his voice. "Think very carefully. Do not say anything foolish." Claire took a deep breath. "I don't want to hide it anymore," she said. "They've been good to me. Elias loves me. Mrs. Bennet has done nothing but be polite tonight. And you two," her voice cracked, "you two are so scared someone will see the truth that you can't even sit through dinner without panicking over a compliance envelope." Evelyn went deathly pale. "Claire, stop." Roland tried again. "We can discuss this later." "No," she cried, tears welling in her eyes. "You always say that. Later, later, later. And all it means is hide it again." Elias stood too, alarmed. "Claire, what is happening? What truth?" Claire wiped her eyes. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "A donor compliance review means we're being investigated," she said softly. "Mom and Dad didn't want you to know. They didn't want anyone to know. Not you, not Mrs. Bennet, not the donors, not the media. Our foundation, it hasn't been honest." Evelyn shook her head violently. "Claire, enough!" But Claire didn't stop. She looked directly at me, chest heaving. "We're in trouble." And then, for the first time all night, Roland snapped. He grabbed Claire's arm. "Sit down." The sound of his voice was ice, a threat disguised as command. Elias shoved his chair back so hard it toppled. "Don't touch her!" The restaurant gasped. People turned. Someone whispered, "Call security." Roland's eyes widened. Shocked, Elias dared to raise his voice. Evelyn's hand gripped her bag tightly, as if protecting the envelope inside with her life. Claire yanked her arm free, her voice cracking. "I'm done. I'm done lying for you." I slowly rose from my seat. No shakiness, no meek posture, no timid expression. For the first time, I lifted my chin, letting them see the steel beneath the disguise. The woman they thought was weak. The woman they treated as insignificant. The woman they believed they could manipulate. Evelyn stared at me like she had never seen me before. Roland stepped back. Even Claire looked startled, not frightened, but stunned at the shift in energy. And Elias? My son's eyes widened in a way I would never forget, as if he was seeing me for the very first time. I took one step forward, then another, until I stood right beside her. Her voice was barely a whisper. What are you doing?" I reached down and tapped the envelope inside her bag. I said quietly, "You should be careful with that. Some secrets are heavier than they look." Her breath hitched. Roland opened his mouth, but I raised a single finger. He froze. Finally, I said softly, "I know more than you think." Claire gasped. Evelyn's face drained of color. Roland's jaw clenched in panic. Elias whispered, "Mom, what do you know?" I looked at my son, then slowly turned my gaze back to the Hartmans. A smile, small, controlled, knowing, curved at the corner of my mouth. I said, "Enough. I know enough." And all three Hartmans realized the quiet mother they thought they could humiliate, the poor woman they thought they could judge, the insignificant person they underestimated, was the one person at this table they should have feared. Because the woman standing before them no longer looked breakable. She looked like someone who had finally decided to uncover their secret, to expose the truth, and to bring everything they pretended to be crashing down. The lights above flickered softly. Somewhere in the distance, a waiter dropped a tray. And the Hartman family, wealthy, polished, superior, untouchable, sat frozen in terror. I stepped back and picked up my faded canvas tote, straightened my wrinkled dress, and whispered just loud enough for them to hear. This was only the beginning. Then I walked toward the exit. No one stopped me.